What other episodes of my podcast?
Because
I launched it off of this one.
Yes, I listened to Werner Herzog.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. Although he's a little bit self-congratulatory, which is a little shocking.
But he is the most interesting man in the universe.
He's a very interesting guy.
Yeah.
He's also been in some really terrible movies. Like he was in that Jack Reacher movie with Tom Cruise. The best part about that movie is that he drives a Chevelle, 1970 Chevelle.
Don't know about this.
You don't know about 70 Chevelles?
Did you listen to the Brett episode?
Brett
Weinstein.
Oh, your brother. No, I did not listen to that one.
Okay.
I've only listened to 5 or 6.
If you listen to episode 19, which is the Brett episode, I think that's been the most important one, except for the one released today.
That sounds like you gear me up for the one released today.
Well, I would start with the Brett one.
And what's so important about the Brett one?
The Brett one is a story about his prediction that all the laboratory mice that we use from the major supplier, which is the Jackson Laboratory in Bar Harbor, Maine, may have been compromised by their breeding protocols, which allowed the telomeres to radically elongate, and that we thought that these mice were representative of all mice and that they had radically elongated telomeres at the end of their chromosomes, which appear to mediate the level of mitosis that can happen during histological repair. So if you imagine that your cells can divide a certain number of times, if there isn't a counter that stops the number of divisions, everything can become tumorous. And since you have like 30 trillion or 100 trillion cells in your body, it means every cell almost can kill you. So it appears that the reason we may die from senescence, that is aging, is that that's our anti-cancer mechanism. So if you eliminate like infectious disease like viruses and insult from being hit by a car, the two things that you have in the end is either you die from immortality, which is cancer, where cells can divide an infinite number of times, or you die from the recursion limit, which is how many times the cell can divide, called in biology the Hayflick limit. And Brett predicted from first principles that what we thought about mice, which is that they have radically elongated telomeres, was only true for laboratory animals because all the laboratory animals in which we test things like drugs have been broken.
They've been broken because of selective breeding?
Yep, because the breeding rotations privileged much younger mice and removed all sort of threats from the environment. And so because telomeres are not protein coding, they're sequences of nucleotides that repeat as a counter rather than coding for a translation in the ribosome into amino acid sequences. What you have is that the body can mutate, if you will, to use the Jackson Laboratories concept of this, very rapidly, because it's not building something structural. It's just a question of, do we have 17 on the end or 170 on the end? Because it's acting, nucleic acid has multiple ways in which it can participate in regulating the body's responses. So in fact, the breeding protocols constituted a novel system of selective pressures that destroyed the efficacy of all of our laboratory animals, potentially.
Holy shit. So
he predicted from first principles, he said, I bet if you test wild type mice rather than laboratory mice, you'll find that their telomeres are not long as you believe. And this was actually carried out by Carol Greider, who did not acknowledge the prediction.
She didn't acknowledge the prediction.
You should listen to the show.
Why did she not acknowledge the prediction?
You should listen to the show.
Okay.
Because it's serious business.
Complicated.
It's a Nobel laureate on the other side of this. So we're taking some risk over there at the portal.
That's really interesting. So the consequences of this could be grave. Could be that so much of the studies that are predicated on these mice tests they're useless.
Well, I've called up the Jackson Laboratory and asked them, have you had any changes in your breeding protocol? They said, we don't even count the number of telomeres, the telomere length. And I say, do you have a history of when you've changed the breeding protocols? Are you aware of these articles? And she said, like what? I said, these articles of Carol Greider. And they said, how do you spell glider? Like the plane? I said, Greider, like the Nobel laureate. And
how do you spell that?
Greider. And so And then they said to me, well, we don't remember if we've changed the protocols. I said, you're producing laboratory animals. I would imagine you would have a documented history of every change in the time series of how these animals were prepared. Like, well, I don't know if there's anyone around from that time. It's like, are you kidding? Were you absent the day they taught science? Who are you? You know, this is like a single point of failure, if true. We've been for 20 years, we've been trying to get an answer.
20 years.
No one will break the story. I mean, this episode, which is almost impossible to listen to, because at the beginning of the episode, I'm absolutely insufferable to Brett because he won't tell the story. He's afraid to tell his own life story.
Why won't he tell the story?
Because in academics, the idea of some punk kid alleging that they predicted in a telephone call to a Nobel laureate that if they would test wild-type mice, the telomeres would be radically shorter than the elongated telomeres of the laboratory test, and then the person refuses to acknowledge that such a prediction was made, even though we have emails from the lab that
so she refuses to acknowledge it, or she doesn't acknowledge it?
I cannot find a single, I've been over the literature, there is no mention anywhere of, and I live this with Brett in real time. So I know the events were happening. We have communications with that lab since. I cannot find any acknowledgement from the Johns Hopkins University laboratory that this interaction ever took place, and that because he called and wrote and did not write an email, he did not have a paper trail of that prediction. Now, there's consequential emails that show the interaction between the labs, but how many times have you ever heard anyone predict a molecular result from first principles in evolutionary theory? This is what Brett was supposed to be famous for, and then he became like this obscure professor at some ridiculous college, and then this thing happened to him. But that's not his origin story. His origin story is that he is the badass of biology who was able to make this prediction from first principles and may have advanced the theory of why we have to die balanced between deaths from immortality, that is tumors, and deaths from recursion limits, that is telomere-mediated hayflick limits.
So what, if anything, has been done since this information has gotten out?
The world went crazy for the episode, and there was silence everywhere inside of what I've called the gated institutional narrative.
Because acknowledge it,
yeah,
they really have to throw out how much research?
We don't know. I don't know. But it puts the question out, how much research is compromised by the laboratory breeding protocols and breeding rotations from a single point of failure at the Jackson Laboratories in Bar Harbor, Maine.
Wow.
Episode 19.
I'll get on it.
And you will hear me in a way where you will just say, Eric is the biggest dick I've ever heard in my life. But it's all to push Brett to actually talk. You should have him back on the show to talk about it. It's killer.
I would love to.
Yeah.
So he just wants to... He kind of wants to soft dance it. Is that what it is? Soft step
He's
it?
just wrong. I mean, here's the problem. There's a point after which I'm not Mr. Nice Guy, and I'm just like adamant. Mm-hmm. Brett is simply wrong. It's a result and a story that needs to be told. If there is another side to the story, we need to hear the other side of the story. And my goal is to have Carol Greider say, you know what, this interaction did happen, and I probably could have handled this better. Because she has work that she's done, which is beyond question, some of the most important work that has nothing to do with anything Brett has done. But it does not give that laboratory the scientific right to deny the existence of this interaction, the importance of the interaction, and because there are potential downstream consequences in pharmaceuticals, we need to have an answer, and every answer is interesting. Like, if the laboratory mice having radically elongated telomeres is not a problem in some way, that's fascinating. How could you have an animal that has this huge adaptation to the laboratory not affect things? That would be interesting. If it does affect things, that's fascinating.
Well, especially if you're if you're running tests on it that have anything to do with telomere length.
Right. Well, no, but if it doesn't have to do, like, for example, let's say you have a really toxic substance, right? And it causes a lot of cell death that requires histological repair. Well, if you have huge, long telomeres, you're going to have an ability to metabolize that toxicity very much better.
Right.
Right? You'll be able to take the insult that comes from this. And so these mice are probably preternaturally disposed towards radical histological repair. That's why they remain youthful and young. And if you test something that might be, if you're doing toxicology studies, it could be that the telomeres, even though you're not testing the telomeres, what you're actually doing is picking up that these broken mice are like the world champs of repair, but they suck at cancer. They all die of cancer.
All of them.
Yeah, almost. Essentially, all the mice with radically elongated telomeres let go long enough all die of cancer because they're tricked out for one special thing, which is we are the best at repair.
Oh, wow.
Right. So think about it as the theory of death, and then clear away all of the noise. There are two ways that nature can't figure out an escape from. Either you die of immortality, which is that you think all your cells want to live forever, and that's a huge death, a huge danger. Or we call it a resource leak in computers. Or they die because the only thing nature can figure out to do is to say you only get a finite number of cell divisions up front. Now there's some adjustments to the theory, but if you only get if you look at the moles on my face, which people love to comment on in the comment section, they probably started as a runaway replicative process that arrested at the border of the mole in order to keep it from killing me. Right? So we have cells that go rogue all the time. But then what happens is that there's some means of making sure that the process doesn't take down the entire organism. But think about 30 trillion assassins as the cells in your body, all of which might kill you at any moment. It's like terrifying.
It's interesting to me that that's the thing that we look forward to the most. To the average person, if they think about space, they think about intelligent life.
Yeah.
That is far more interesting to them than the fact that there's black holes out there that are devouring planets.
Yeah.
That are sucking stars into its event horizon.
Yeah.
This infinite point of density that we can't even really begin to imagine with our own little brains.
Yeah. And the fact that all this arose without a guiding intelligence.
Yeah.
That there are black holes and there are active galactic nuclei and there are black holes slamming into each other, creating gravitational waves that we can actually detect. I mean, it is a wonderfully rich reality that we are fortunate to be part of.
Do you experience much pushback or much conflict from religious people who don't like the fact that you describe things in that way, that didn't need an intelligent force or an intelligent creator to exist?
It's an interesting question because the biological community, people like Richard Dawkins and the like, I think have really borne the brunt of the religious pushback because they're dealing directly with the phenomena of life, and that's the precious commodity that somehow we want to be sacred, and therefore our religious sensibility will push back on it just being the mindless laws of physics and evolution yielding life on planet Earth. They haven't pushed as hard on the quantum physicists and the cosmologists as they have on the biologists. But I have had conversations. Many of them are respectful as opposed to antagonistic, where the view is that I am wrong-headed, that I am missing the point. And some of these religious folks are fantastically accomplished scientists.
That's weird.
Yeah. I mean, I went to a gathering. I think I can talk about it now. It was closed-door gathering. You weren't meant to describe it.
Hope you don't get sued by this one.
Yeah, that's right. I'm really opening myself here. I thought it was called Science and the Spiritual Quest. And it was a bunch of scientists that were being brought together. And I thought it was going to be an interesting but ultimately one-note meeting. I thought everybody's going to basically say the same thing. There could be a God. There's no evidence for a God. We've got the laws of physics. And we're going to just press forward under the assumption that physics is all there is until the clouds part and God reveals him or herself or itself to us. And at that point, we may change our tune. It was not one note. I was the only person who had that perspective in the room. Everybody else was coming at religion from a very different way of thinking about the world. In fact, there's one Nobel laureate in the room who got up and sang psalms as part of his presentation. And I was sitting there and I was like, what is happening here? This is so unexpected to me. And what it really meant was I was so close-minded into the varieties of religious engagement that happen in the world. And it opened my eyes. And there's one Nobel laureate in particular, I did say to him at the end, I said, when you look at me and you hear my view, what do you think? And he kind of put his arm around me in an avuncular way and said, you know, you're a real smart guy, and you don't understand the true reality. And I think ultimately you will, because you're open-minded, and you're on a journey, and I hope that your journey will finally take you to the place where I have been for many years. That was so unexpected that this Nobel laureate, who I respected for his concrete mathematical and experimental work, saw the world completely differently.
Now, was there a
me.
spectrum of belief?
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I was the one who was far
The only
out.
one.
I was the one who
You
was
were untethered.
Yeah, I mean, I came in there. I was like, whoa, you know, and now clearly they arranged the meeting to have a spectrum of perspectives. I mean, this is not something that was randomly designed, and it just so happened. But it was an eye opener, and from that I went to read. Do you know William James's book, Varieties of Religious Experience?
No.
Yeah. So it's a book that William James, a great psychologist, wrote in 1902. And it was based on a series of lectures I think he gave in Scotland. And it is the most heartfelt and rational approach to religion and science that I think has ever been written. And yet most people don't know much about it. Because what he does is he goes through and he documents through his own research and through reading biographies and interviewing individuals the vastly different ways that people think about religion and why they think about religion and the value that religion has in their lives. And when you read that book, it doesn't convert me. I haven't changed my views on whether or not there is a God, but it has changed my views on the value of a religious sensibility, the role that it plays in people's lives. Now, look, it can be, you know, you talk to people like Sam Harris, and you know, it's a destructive force in the world, and it has been a destructive force in some ways. But that's not the full story. Right. A fuller story is that for some individuals, it gives a connection to a historical lineage that's deeply valued. For some individuals, it puts their life in a larger setting that allows them to be in the world in a more productive way. So there are a whole range of roles that religious engagement can play. The problem is when you start to pit it against scientific insight, then you run into trouble. But religion was never developed to give us factual information about the world. Religion will never give us the electron magnetic moment to 9 decimal places. That's the purview of scientific investigation. And if you can keep these straight in your mind, there's a definite and powerful role for a religious sensibility in the world.
Yeah, I feel like it gives people in a lot of ways a scaffolding for ethics and morality and allows them some alleviation of anxiety.
Yeah,
exactly. It gives them a feeling of purpose. But like you said, as long as it's not conflicting with rigid scientific reality.
Yeah,
like
right.
Scientific, provable scientific reality.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, it's a funny thing. You know, Richard Dawkins, I don't know, have you had him on the program?
Yeah.
So you know that his MO in the world is very anti-religious.
Yes.
I think he would agree with me on that. I don't want to put words into his mouth. But I did an event with him in New York, the Beacon Theater. I don't know, it was maybe a year ago or something like that. And it was very interesting because in a one-on-one conversation, his views were very similar to mine. I felt, look, we don't agree in totality, but I was saying to him, there are times I go around the world and I will do things that are utterly irrational. I'll knock on wood for good luck. I'll speak to my dead father. I know that he's not really there. I'll pray to God on occasion if I think that I could use that backup. Not because I think there's some bearded individual in the sky. It's just a behavioral tendency that I find to be comforting and useful. And I said this to Richard, and he said, I totally get it. I was like, what? He was like, I totally get it. He said, in fact, I don't like to sleep in a house that has a reputation as being haunted. And for me, it was such a beautiful human moment. It was such a beautiful human moment where we were just like being human beings.
Right.
And he said, we're both sinners. And I agree. We are both sinners in that sense because we know how the world works. We know this doesn't make any sense. And yes, it's still part of somehow how we behave in the world. And I think there's a value to recognizing that that is what it means to be human. You will engage in the world in ways that are not necessarily strictly adhering to some rational perspective of how the scientific world operates.
I would love to see Richard Dawkins outside of a haunted house saying,
right.
I'm not going in there.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all just to say that I kind of feel like there are many pathways toward insight in the world. There are many ways to live a life. Mm-hmm. There are many ways to come to terms with our own impermanence. And it's not as though something is right or something is wrong. It's a question of, is it useful to you? And I think that we have to be very open-minded in the kinds of behaviors that that we allow to happen in the world. Even Ramtha, it's nutty stuff.
Yeah.
But if some of those individuals who go there find that it allows them to live in the world in a more productive way, alleviating anxiety, feeling like they're on a spiritual quest, so be it.
That's the thing it's hard for people to understand if you're not in that space, that headspace that they are. You don't need this structure. But for some people, even Scientology or something along those lines, it seems loopy on paper, can provide them with legitimate structure and benefit their lives in a tangible way that they could describe to you.
Yeah, exactly. And my feeling is that if there was, and I don't know this to be the case, and maybe some biologists will push back on this, but if there was a race of, for want of a better word, Vulcan-like individuals who approach the world in a completely rational manner, evaluating the data, figuring out the most sensible course of action, competing against a crazy group of individuals like us who will come up with wild fictional ideas, gods in the heavens, demons haunting the world. I think it's the latter group that ultimately would triumph. Because with that kind of freedom of thought, you get novelty, you get ingenuity, you get creativity. And so I feel as though this is part and parcel of who we are and why we have survived. And to sort of come at the world with a scientific club that's meant to smash away anything that disagrees with the scientific worldview is an unfortunate way of looking at the world.
Yeah, there's something about creativity that it doesn't necessarily have to abide by any laws of logic, and it can still be beneficial.
Yeah, and that's why it's so stunning when somebody comes up with something. It's like, where did that come from? It didn't come from a rational approach to working out, Brahms' Third Symphony. It emerged from the churning emotions of an individual who happens to be made up of trillions of particles, guided by physical law, responding to the environment, which is impinging his senses with an incredible array of influences. And through that whirl emerges this spectacular piece of music. That's breathtaking.
Yeah.
Utterly breathtaking.
Yeah, and it's amazing what that music can inspire as it reaches out to, X amount of people and then causes different thoughts in their mind. Yeah. And then that causes, in turn, another branch of creativity, another new line of thinking that they might have never pursued before.
Yeah, and that to me establishes that the notion that language is the only way that we can know about the world. Wittgenstein had this perspective, the limits of my language, limits of my world. That seems to me utterly wrong. I mean, the experience of music or the experience of cogitating about the world but not trying to overlay a narrative upon it, just feeling your way into reality, reveals things about the world that I think are beyond linguistic.
If you can talk religion with a really intelligent person who's objective, who has a belief, it's such an interesting subject because it requires suspension of disbelief in order to absorb some of the stories. But there's clearly a history behind this of thousands of years of translations, and you're trying to get to what did they mean when they wrote this down, and how much did they know, and what were they trying to do? Were they just trying to get everybody to calm down and stay in line?
Right. Or were they trying to find some means of gluing the group together by a shared belief? Or, there are folks who basically say that there are qualities of the human brain that naturally leave it open to a religious sensibility.
Yes.
I mean, for instance, we have agency detection systems in our brain where we look around the world and we tend to assign agency to things that happen. That's useful, right?
Yeah.
Because, if you mistake a windblown branch for a jaguar, yeah, it's fine. You thought it was a jaguar, but it's just a branch. But if the reverse happens, you think it was a jaguar and you think it's a windblown branch, you're going to get eaten.
Yeah.
So we tend to over-endow agency into the world. There is evolutionary value to that. So when the wind blows, we tend to think there's a mind up there. When the river gurgles, we tend to think that there's a mind in there.
Yeah.
And this is sort of the seed for the kinds of perspectives that you'll find in many of the world's religions. So there's natural course of events that can lead to the arising of the institution, or at least the ideas behind the institution of religion. And for students that have never encountered that idea before, it can really shake things up, and I think in a very valuable way. So I think you're absolutely right. Having a conversation with somebody who has a religious perspective is deeply interesting.
Yes.
To understand where that mind came to the place that it got to. And from a personal sensibility, I give you, I just give you one little anecdote. My dad died. I was 23 years old. And unexpectedly, I'd been visiting home. I was at Harvard at the time. I was visiting from Cambridge, and we had a nice weekend. And by the time I got back to Cambridge on the bus, my mom called me and said, "Dad's dead." It was so shocking. It was like so sudden. It was so complete. And I remember I went back home, and my dad was not a religious man, but we knew that he would want to have a religious ceremony, and we did it. And we had, a minion of Jews coming to the house to recite the Kaddish prayer, because we weren't religious. We didn't know what we were doing, And I had no idea what these men were saying. But it was deeply comforting. In fact, I didn't want to know what they were saying. To me, it was just a collection of ancient sounds. But the sounds connected me across the generations to a culture that had been extending back 5,000 years. And in a moment of crisis, that was a very comforting and useful connection to have.
Yeah, that is where I find people get the most out of religion, in the fact that it brings communities together in this sort of cohesive ritual where everybody acts together and you feel like there's completion to it.
Yeah.
Like you're putting someone, you're putting someone into perspective, and you're doing so with this religious ceremony.
And when large groups of people get together and engage in a ritual behavior, something magical happens. I've spoken to evolutionary psychologists like Steve Pinker, who's a wonderful thinker.
I've had him in here too.
Yeah, okay. And Steve is skeptical that this kind of ritual behavior can yield the kind of cohesive bonding that some people suggest that it does. But you probably have, but I have on occasion engaged in these ritual behaviors, mass drumming and movement, and I gotta tell you, you are quickly, I find, transported to a place where you are now part of a collective, and you feel yourself melting into the group, and you are one. And if you've never had that experience, I think it's something that you should have, because I think it's a vital part of our heritage. It is part of how we got to be who we are.
Yeah, there's something about group acceptance and a group of people acting and doing something together that does create this very strange bond.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily exist amongst individuals. It's a weird bond.
It's a very weird bond because it has nothing to do with the individuals, nothing to do with the personality of Jim or Mary. It's irrelevant at that point. It's somehow joining you together into this massive humanity that's all engaged in the same practice, and somehow you feel as though your identity humanity melts into the larger whole. I don't know why it happens.
There's negative aspects to that sort of thinking,
course,
or that
yeah.
mob mentality.
Of course.
Like, have you ever been in a situation where things got chaotic and you really had this feeling like anything can happen at any moment?
I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
I've never been part of it. But
It's very weird.
But I have
There's
a sort of
feeling in the air.
Yeah, I have an analogous one, which is, my brother is a Hare Krishna.
Whoa.
And so, he is 13 years older than me and left college in the 60s, which was a tumultuous time, and went to Europe and ultimately joined into what many people think of as some kind of cultish activity.
Yeah.
And so, but he's not a cult thinker. He's an original thinker. He's a brilliant thinker. And yet, within this group mentality, you can imagine a certain kind of group think can take over. At least people imagine that this happens. So, yes, it has positive aspects and it can have negative aspects. But in the end, I think there is a long lineage in which those of our forebears who survived were the ones who could join together into these more potent, these more powerful groups. And that way we're able to triumph over other groups, in the ancestral environment. Yeah. There's different readings of the archaeological record, whether it was a dangerous place in the hunter-gatherer past or a sort of placid place. But one reading says it was a very dangerous place, and therefore those groups that survived were the ones who were able to establish this kind of allegiance to the whole.
Yes.
And certainly I think this kind of ritual behavior may have been part of that.
Bond together through shared experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
And belief.
Yeah.
And if you're all believing in the same supernatural entity, that's a powerful, in principle, powerful glue.
Do you find that there's, I don't want to say an arrogance in some academics, maybe it's not the right word, but this being too quick to dismiss any positive benefit at all about religion?
Yes. It's the knee-jerk reaction among a certain group of academics, and it feels deeply unfortunate to me. It almost feels like a religion of its own sort when it's just the response as opposed to a careful, thoughtful, heartfelt analysis of the situation. I frankly wish that more people would read William James's book, because I do think that it's the kind of, because here's a scientist, right, a deeply thoughtful scientist who knows how to analyze data, knows how to rationally engage with the world, who was plumbing the depths of religion in a very, very meaningful and sensitive way. And by the end of these lectures, I think it's lecture number 20 or something, he describes religion as this as something that helps the journey toward the terror and the beauty of phenomenon. He describes it as the voice of the thunder, the gentleness of the summer rain. He describes it in terms of the sublimity of the stars. And this kind of transcendent approach to the religious experience, I think, brings it out of the academic guise that is often thrown upon it, which is something that is contravening everything we know about the world. It's causing people to think in ways that are irrational. I mean, this whole trope that you hear, it's not that there isn't some truth to that, but it's an incomplete truth. And if you're willing to approach religion in a way where you discard the pieces that offend you, throw away the parts that you think are utter nonsense, only keep those aspects that are useful to you in your life, then there is a place for it.
Well, I think therein lies the problem with a lot of people. They're not willing to do that.
Right.
This need for suspension of disbelief troubles them so much that they feel like fools if they buy into something.
Right.
And we're also dealing with all religions except the ones that are super questionable, like Scientology or Mormonism,
right,
that are very old. And the idea of maybe it would be better if we came up with something that we could all agree on in 2020.
Right.
Maybe it would be wonderful if we have something that maybe has science in it, maybe something that has a genuine understanding of how human beings react and what the benefits of community
and
having these in environments where loving, conscious people communicate with each other in a very positive way, that this could be a new form of this thing that we seem to desire so greatly.
Yeah, and I agree. And I have to say I make this point in the book because the point that I make there is that to truly engage with the world, you have to use a variety of stories. We're fundamentally storytellers. That's what human beings are. Now, there's the reductionist story that physicists are well equipped to talk about with particles and laws of physics. On top of that, you've got the chemist story, the complex molecules. You've got the biologist story that begins to talk about cells and life. You got the psychological story, the neurophysiological story that brings in mind and consciousness. And within that, you then have all of the activities that conscious beings undertake, which includes religion and includes telling other kinds of stories and includes creative expression. You need them all. And to sort of say that the scientific account is the only account by which you're ever going to gain true qualities of the world is a very, in my view, limited description of what truth is. There is objective truth in the world that we can measure, that we can describe with equations and so forth, but there's also internal truth, spiritual truth that you get to by self-examination. It's real in the sense that you're understanding how you respond to the world. And that is something which is deeply personal, but utterly real. And whether it's through psychedelics, whether it's through ayahuasca, whether it's through a spiritual journey, whether it's through religion, regardless, all of this adds color to the story of what it means to be a human being.
What's your opinion? I wanted to pick your brain on that because me and my wife, we have a pact, okay? And people are going to think we're crazy, but I don't give a shit. We have, since we met in 2016 in Thailand, we never had a night apart.
Whoa!
I know.
No nights apart at all.
And I loved it because I said I don't know. We have only one life, and I love her to death. She's my life partner. She's my she always believed in me. I think she's the reason why I became champion because prior to meeting her, I was just no ambition, no nothing. I mean, and then. My point is that the reason behind that is that I want to, you need more coffee, eh?
No.
I want to spend as much time as I can because you don't know if there's something after. So, what do you think?
I think you should be happy. And if you're happy doing that, that's great.
No, I mean, not about that. I'm super happy with that. That's my goal in life is to to have as much time as I can with her. But I mean, do you think... Because it's so hard.
It's helping?
No, not this. About the afterlife. I'm like for like science. I think it leads to that we're gonna just cease existing.
Yeah, but that's not science, honestly.
Okay.
Well, science is the study of how the brain works and the study of where the memory is located and what parts of the brain are affected by injury, and studies on fMRI where they're measuring areas of the brain that are active during specific activities. That's real science. There's no real science about what happens when you die. It's pure speculation.
I mean, like body, our physical body. I'm saying we're gonna just it's gonna die, right? And then my point is, I know there's absolutely no science about that, but my point is, I'm doing speculations that if we do stop existing, we do stop living and breathing. What's our essence? Where is it going? Right? Is there an energy? There's a spirit? It's so hard to say.
Well, no one can really say.
Exactly.
It's pure speculation, and I'm always skeptical of people that think they know for sure nothing happens, as much as I'm skeptical of people that think for sure they know what happens.
Absolutely.
It's just comforting for some people to have an answer, whether it's the lights go out and that's it. I mean, that's Richard Dawkins' perspective.
Oh yeah, is it?
Yeah, but other people's perspective. But he's never done psychedelics, and just he's got this very reductionist perspective, scientific based on what we know right now. So
he's adamant that when you die, you die.
Yeah, but that's nonsense. He doesn't know. I mean, you don't know. I mean, I understand that he's a man of science and logic, and this is how he likes to frame the world. But the reality is no one has any idea.
And most people don't want to adhere to that train of thought because it's very scary.
It's also... If you've done psychedelic drugs, you know that there's a very strange thing that can happen to your brain and to your consciousness when it interacts with certain molecules. What is that?
Never tried it.
Well, some people believe that is a portal to the afterlife, and that what happens when you die and during periods of extreme stress, your brain produces psychedelic chemicals. We don't know what the soul is. Is that a real thing? Is it nonsense? Yeah. We don't know. Is your consciousness your consciousness is clearly affected by injury to the brain, and it's clearly affected by age. It's clearly affected by deterioration. It's clearly affected by some exogenous chemicals.
Okay.
But is that you, or is that something that your brain is housing? I mean, what happens when you die? Does it transfer to something else? Does your brain, house consciousness, or does your body house consciousness, or is consciousness a part of it? And when your brain shuts off, there's no activity. Does the consciousness cease?
Yeah.
Or do you transcend? No one knows. No one really knows.
I think Penn and Teller, he has what's the big guy's name?
Penn.
Yeah, I think I like his what he said. He said, "We don't know." That's the real answer.
The real answer is we don't know. Yeah.
Anybody saying other thing that is, I mean, I don't know. Maybe they know something we don't know, but
it's interesting. It's interesting to think of, and there's a lot of people that don't believe that you are the same person every day. There's a lot of people that believe that when you go to sleep, that you wake up in the morning and you assume that all of your memories of your life, they're accurate, and that you are absolutely the person that you were when you went to bed the day before. But you don't even know that.
Oh, that's a great. Oh,
you don't
never
really
thought about
know
that.
You know that you have some memories that you can call upon.
Unless you record them like you do.
But even if you record them, like, who the fuck is recording it? Are you sure that's you?
Okay.
I mean, are you the same person? I mean, there's all these ideas of many worlds. These quantum physicists like to bring up that there's a bunch of different interactions that are happening simultaneously, and that it's so hard to even. It's so hard to even conceive of the possibility of multiple dimensions, and then the possibility of infinite universes. That
can I conceive that? Yeah.
That we travel back and forth through all these different things, and that based on the decisions that you make, based on who the fuck knows, an infinite number of variables, that your life moves in a bunch of different directions. The idea of an infinite universe also means there's an infinite number of David Ledoux's out there.
I know.
That's what's really crazy. There's an infinite number of young Jamies. There's an infinite number of, fill in the blank, Neil deGrasse Tyson's, Mike Tyson, Vander Holyfield. There's an infinite number of them. And they're all doing different things and all slightly different lives.
How was it when you did that, when you did the DMT?
I've done it a bunch of times. It's very strange.
I'm scared of that.
You should be scared.
Okay.
I'm scared.
And what does it look like? What does it look like?
It looks like, well, it depends on the purity of it. When you get it really pure, it's almost like a white-looking crystal. Sometimes it's a little bit yellowish. It's more of a yellowish-looking crystal. And you freebase it.
And that's something that our brain creates.
Yes,
secretes.
your brain produces it. It's one of the reasons why your body can bring it back to baseline so quickly. Your body knows what to do with it. It has it. It's a part of your whole chemical system.
How did you come up? Like, how did you read about this? How did you come up with this?
I don't remember how I first heard of it. I think I heard of it listening to Terrence McKenna talk about it. I think that was the first thing I ever heard of it. And when I first did it, I couldn't even believe. I couldn't believe that this is a possibility. That this is something that exists on Earth that so many people don't even know about.
Did you you need to lock the doors when you do it? Like you need to.
I did it in in my living room with some friends.
Okay.
Sat down.
How long does it last?
About 15, 20 minutes.
It's short.
It's very
I thought it was
short.
like a 3-day thing. I'm gonna.
No.
Okay.
It feels like it's 3 days.
Okay.
It feels like forever and then instant. It feels like it just happened, and it also feels like forever. But it's very strange. It feels like you've been there before. When you go there, that's one of the It's like you leave the world. You leave this space, and you go to some incredible dimension that seems more real than this. It's very, very intense.
Now, Joe, I want to talk to you about your language. Why the fuck do you swear so much?
I don't know.
Have you read anything about the science of swearing?
No.
Do you know that there is a science of swearing?
A science?
Yes, it's pretty interesting stuff.
Oh.
So the part of your brain that produces swear words is not the part of the brain that manages ordinary language.
Oh.
Really interesting. We have 2 language centers in our left frontal cortex. Mm-hmm. People that have strokes that damage them often lose language completely, but they can still swear. So swearing is coming from somewhere else. It may be coming from the right hemisphere, but it's also coming from deeper centers in the brain that connect to the limbic system and the amygdala, and that connects to the involuntary nervous system. So here's a couple interesting facts.
Okay.
Swearing is associated with sweating, increased sweating. So you should be dripping with sweat.
I haven't sweat that much. I'm a comedian. I'm sure it's uncomfortable
secondly,
for you.
also interesting, swearing increases pain tolerance. And there's an interesting experiment. You know, the standard way they do pain tolerance, they have people stick their hand in a bucket of ice and water, and you see how long they can keep it there. The people who say, fuck, shit, can keep it there much longer than people who are not allowed to swear.
What about noises? What if they just go, ah?
No, it was swearing specifically.
So they've tried noises and swearing?
Yeah,
and
so it
swearing
may
one?
be, you know, when you, if you're hammering a nail and hit your thumb,
Yeah.
you use one of those words, that's a good strategy.
That's interesting because I almost always do that. If I hurt something, especially a finger, you know, like I slammed a finger in a car door the other day and I went, motherfucker. So that's what that is?
But and it's interesting. It's coming. There's a different part of the brain that manages that. It has different emotional content.
Yeah, it flavors language.
Yes.
I like them. I'm a big fan of the swears.
I'll leave you some papers about the science of swearing.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Now, what would happen if they were no longer taboo? Would the same
They'd lose
areas,
their power. I think they'd lose their power.
Yeah.
Right.
The same areas of the brain wouldn't.
No.
Like, I remember there was an episode of, I don't remember what television show, but it was on CBS.
Yeah.
And they had a line at the end of the show, and essentially they were saying, shit happens. And it was a big deal.
I'll bet.
It was a big deal that they wanted to be able to say shit happens. And apparently they pulled this off, and they got it through, and it was like a 10 p.m. show, so it was okay. And it was 11 o'clock by the time they said shit. And I remember thinking, like, wow, what a strange sort of, like, how many people were involved in this sort of dance? Like, how many lawyers and executives and who, like, it's very strange.
Very strange.
That this one word would, everybody knows the word.
Right.
It's not even that
So it's
offensive.
kind of a kind of game we all
Yes,
play, right?
yes. So, but you're saying this game is facilitated by one specific part of the brain, and is that because, like,
I don't
swear
know.
words are taboo words,
They're
right?
taboo words, and often associated with things that we find offensive, or with bodily acts that freak people out.
Yeah.
So there's both there's a psychological, social aspect to it, but there's also a neurological aspect to it.
Now, when the words, like some words for some people, like I remember when I was a kid, I lived in Florida for a little bit, and I said hell once. And in Florida in the 1970s, hell was a swear. Like, I don't know. I mean, I came from New Jersey, and then I was in San Francisco, and then also I was in Florida, and I said hell. And they're like, don't swear like that in this class. I was like, swear? What the fuck are you people talking about? Like, it didn't make any sense to me. And then I was like, you guys have different swears.
Yeah.
Now, if you had a word that was not taboo to you, would that same area of your brain be?
I don't know. There has not been a lot of research. It hasn't been taken seriously, but that's all interesting questions that should be studied.
Because if you're a really super conservative person, there's
Right.
a lot of words that are off the table.
Yeah.
But if you are a far more, just loose with your language, you could shit this and this, God damn it. That would be nothing. Like,
Right.
God damn it would be just like,
Yes.
shucks.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to someone, God damn it would be like a really big deal.
Yeah.
Really big deal. So, like, what it would be, different parts of the brain would be activated by that versus if you said it, it would be not that big a deal. But if someone was like super conservative and they said
Probably
it,
even more.
yeah, wow.
Yeah, interesting.
What do you think that is a universal thing? I mean, it obviously
Seems to be
language-wise,
universal.
right?
Seems to be universal. Another finding that I came across is that people who learn a second language, that swearing in the second language does not have the same emotional impact that your first language does.
Oh, that makes sense. That's why
Yeah.
they're so fun when you learn
Yeah.
Spanish swears. It's like you get a free ride.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and you can do them on television too, right? You can
Yeah.
say a lot of Spanish swears
Right.
on English-speaking TV, and everybody just pleads ignorance. Does every language have?
Yes.
They all have swears.
Yeah. Every language has taboo words, swear words.
Wow.
Yeah, it's universal.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
Asian languages,
Yeah.
European languages,
Yeah.
all of them, huh?
Yeah.
Wow. Huh. So that that would, at least to my brain, seem to indicate that there's like some use for that.
Yes. Well, there are probably many uses. One is this thing of modulating pain. One is a social bonding, forming some community.
Yeah, that's how I kind of use it.
Yeah,
I think when I swear in front of people, I'm chesting them out.
Yeah.
Like, you freaking out if I say fuck? Because if you are, I can't talk to you.
Right.
Like, you're too much work.
Right.
You know? You know what I mean? Like,
I know exactly what
if you're talking to someone and every other word, like, well, I really wish you wouldn't use that language. Well, okay. There's so much work to do here.
I know exactly.
Can't hold
what
your
you mean.
hand, dance through this garden.
Right.
Yeah. It's to me also, like, I hang around with a lot of people that swear a lot because I hang around with professional comedians and fighters, and there's a lot of swashbuckling, freewheeling type of individuals involved in those pursuits. And
I've never censored what I say. I've always put it all out there.
good for you.
Yeah, I've done that all my life.
But don't you find that it's more not just accepted, but people are more interested in it now because of the internet?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because I've heard about you for many, many years, but it's sort of ramped up over the last decade or so.
Right.
Yeah, because of the internet.
Right.
Because people have this.
But I've been around. It's funny when I look at this stuff, like all the stuff about pot and psychedelics, placebos. I was saying this stuff in the 1970s. My first book, The Natural Mind, was published in 1972. It argued that everybody has an innate drive to alter their consciousness.
Yeah.
And that drugs are one way of doing it. I did the first human experiments with pot that were ever done with under double-blind conditions.
What experiments did you do?
I gave marijuana to people in a laboratory in 1968.
And what'd you test them for?
Well, we were just seeing people bet me you couldn't do it. Nobody had ever done this. All this marijuana was becoming such a big thing, and there were no experiments.
Like what kind of experiments?
I took the most basic stuff. I just wanted to show that you could give it to human subjects in a lab and get away with it because people thought you couldn't.
You mean in terms of the FTC?
In terms of law, lawsuits, everything.
Okay.
One of the things I wanted to give it to people that never had it before, so there'd be no expectations. Everyone said, this is terrible. They're going to turn into heroin addicts from giving them stuff like that. Anyway, I just wanted to see basic stuff like, does it dilate the pupils of the eyes? Because cops were busting people. They'd say their eyes are dilated.
Yeah.
Must be high on marijuana. And they'd search. But marijuana doesn't. We showed doesn't dilate the pupils of the eyes. I tested blood sugar because people said the reason people get hungry is because blood sugar drops. Has no effect on blood sugar. We showed that, people who had never had marijuana before in a lab, you could show slight decreases in performance, in motor function and cognitive function. But people who were regular users of it, you couldn't show that they had adapted to it.
Yeah, my take on that is that I think the people that are not regular users are freaking out.
Yeah.
And because they're nervous.
It's novel sensations, and they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, and they just don't know how to relax.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's the big one to me with physical movement because they want to test drivers and all sorts of other things for marijuana. I'm like, this is not alcohol. You're talking about a completely different thing.
If I had a choice of being a passenger with these drivers, I'll tell you which one I would take. A person who had never used marijuana and had just smoked. A person who was a user of marijuana and had just smoked but had never driven high, a person who was a regular user of marijuana and had practiced driving high, and a person with any amount of alcohol in their system. I take the third as the best bet.
Yes, the third's the best bet. Yeah, that guy's a wizard, I bet.
Right.
That guy drives high every day.
Yeah, so he's used to it and not going to show any effect on his performance.
Yeah, the experience is a novel experience, and if you're accustomed to it, then it's just like, here we go. This is my normal world.
And for many people, you have to learn to get high. You have to learn to associate the subtle physical cues with the altered state. That's a common thing. People feel nothing the first time they try it.
Yeah, you do hear that, right? But I don't think they know what the fuck they're talking about. Like, bro, you're high as fuck. Now, when you did these experiments, what did you have to clear these with the FDA?
You would not believe.
What did you have to do?
I had to get permission from the FDA, which said that I couldn't do it unless I first got permission from, it was the old Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which was the Treasury guys. Oh. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics said, we'll give you permission once the FDA gives you permission. So they played that off. Then I had to get permission from the state of Massachusetts, from 2 agencies there. And there were 2 universities involved, Harvard University and Boston University. So coordinating all this stuff was unbelievable. And then once all the approvals came in, I had to get the pot, and there was no legal source of it. So the Federal Bureau of Narcotics gave me confiscated pot that they had confiscated in some case in Texas. They brought it over. They had delayed us so long, I didn't even know if I had time to do the experiments because I was going to graduate. Anyway, they brought this stuff on a Friday afternoon. It was shit. I mean, it was brown, dry. It looked like it'd been sitting in a warehouse for years.
Right.
So the first thing I did was roll up a joint and smoke it. No effect, whatever. I called the agent that I dealt with, and I said, this stuff is no good. And he said, how do you know? You haven't had time to run any experiments. And I said, I looked at it under the microscope, and there was no resin on it. So they grumbled, and they gave me other stuff, which was passable.
So, but again, confiscated stuff.
Yeah.
Because we always used to hear when we were kids about government weed. The government weed was the good weed. Do you
that
remember
was
that?
later. That was later when research got going and the government started a pot farm in Mississippi to provide pot for research, which was much better.
And there was only a handful of people that were under these experiments, correct?
It was so they made it so difficult to conduct research, as they have with psychedelics. No, that's slowly changing.
When you're writing a book, you're literally inside working all the time.
Yeah. So explain to people what the book is.
So the book is called The End of Gender. And before I go any further, I'm going to explain the title because some people, I think, misinterpret what when I announced it on social media. Some people were getting upset because I think they thought I was taking a very, very far left progressive view. And I consider myself to be a liberal. I'm definitely not far left, but, I have liberal values. I'm pro-science. And so The End of Gender, I think people thought that I meant I was saying that gender is basically whatever you want it to be. It's based solely in self-identification. There's no tethering to biology, and that is not what I'm saying with the book at all. And I think if anyone's ever read my columns or seen my appearances or they listened to the talk that I had with you last time I was on your show, that's definitely not what I'm saying. I'm saying the complete opposite, that the fact that science denial and misinformation about gender is so prominent now is really poorly affecting our ability to understand gender, and that's leading to the demise of our understanding of it in an accurate way. If you don't mind, just to start things off, will you please give your credentials and tell people what you do? Yeah, so I have a PhD in sexual neuroscience research. I made the transition from being an academic sex researcher to being a journalist. So now I write about the science of sex and gender. I write about the politicization of science and academic censorship. And so now I have this book out, and I can talk a bit about how I got here, if that would be helpful. Or... Sure. Yeah. So when I was doing my PhD, I loved being a sex researcher. I really thought I was going to stay in academia. And in the last few years, I noticed that there had been a change in the climate in terms of what people could study, what people could talk about as scientific experts. And one area in particular was about gender transition in children. So every single mainstream news piece was saying that for these children who say they're born in the wrong body, the best approach for them would be early transitioning. So that means to take on a new name, identify as the opposite sex, usually get a haircut, start dressing like the opposite sex. But from a scientific perspective, all of the research actually shows that most of these kids, the vast majority of them, are more likely to grow up to be gay in adulthood. They're not going to be transgender. And at that time, there's literally maybe 1 or 2 news articles that called into question this narrative of early transitioning. So I wrote an op-ed about this, citing the scientific research, and I asked my colleagues and mentors in academia, what do you think? I knew that there was going to be some backlash to it. And one of my mentors said to me, because I said, should I wait until I have tenure to put something like this out? And he said, nowadays tenure is not going to protect you. So that sealed my decision. I published the piece, and then from there I made the transition to journalism, and I haven't looked back. It's a very strange time when it comes to talking about certain subjects, because it doesn't matter what the science is. There are specific narratives that you have to adhere to in today's climate. I, like you, am also left. But when it comes to saying far left is a different thing now than it used to be. Far left used to be, 10, 15 years ago, it was a different animal. And I knew a lot of people that were far left. Now far left I associate with lunacy.
It's like I look at it the same way I look at far right. I look at far right extremists and far left extremists. But something happened where far left ideology has permeated our culture when it comes to gender. And I don't understand it. If you don't adhere to this ideology, people want to say that you have no compassion, you're evil, you're bigoted. I had Abigail Shearer on the podcast recently, and I love
Abigail.
She's great, and she's very brave. And I saw what happens when you go against this narrative by having her on. Men's Health wrote a piece about me saying I'm fanning the flames of hate because she was talking about a 4,000% increase in teenage girls identifying as trans and rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is real. I mean, this is a real scientific phenomenon.
70 times what you would see in the general population in terms of people identifying as transgender.
It's amazing. She was talking about this in this very specific way, talking about awkward teenage girls and about how these girls have, really odd situations in terms of the way they deal with people socially. And then all of a sudden they're praised for deciding that they're trans, and then they get these clusters of friends that also decide that they're trans, which is very strange. It's just a very strange phenomenon, but you're not even allowed to talk about it. So if Men's Health, it's a fucking men's magazine, is going to write articles calling you a hateful person because you're discussing it. There was no hate in that podcast at all. It was just discussing it, like what is causing this, why is this, and what can be done, and why are we so quick to just? I mean, we can assume that people are troubled in all sorts of different ways, but we can't assume they're ever troubled when it comes to gender. It's very bizarre.
I think what you were saying with why it's gone so far left, I do think a lot of this is coming from empathy, which is a good thing. And I have to say, with regard to the issue of transitioning children, I do support transitioning in adults. I think it can help adults who are transgender. I think if you were an adult, it's your decision, it's your body, it's no one's place to tell you what to do. But I think a lot of this is coming from, so I grew up in the gay community, and I remember seeing how homophobic people could be toward my friends. And I think things have changed. Things have gotten better in some ways. I think homophobia still exists, and we can talk about that because I do talk about how that affects a lot of what we're seeing in the book. But I think for a lot of people, they look at that and they say, okay, we were wrong about that. We were wrong to treat gay people differently. We were wrong to say that being gay is something you can change. So now they've gone completely in the opposite direction, saying, okay, no matter what anyone says with regard to their identity, with regard to their gender, this is something that we should not challenge. We should fully support. And if you question it in any way, even in the most nuanced or sensitive way, as I try to, and as I think you do, that's still not acceptable.
Yeah, that's what's strange. It's an ideology. It's rigid. It's like a religion.
It is. I find people who are, middle of the road, they're not sure what to think. If they read my work or they talk to me, they say, oh, wow, I never realized that. I didn't know the science said that. And they change their perspective. But I think for some people, if they are very much invested in the identity or very, very invested in activism, or for whatever reason, this ideology means something to them, you just cannot reason with them. It doesn't matter what the science says, they will find something to pick at. And especially with desistance, which is that the research I was mentioning where it shows that most kids will not feel gender dysphoric anymore when they reach puberty. Some people cannot accept it, and they will call you transphobic, they'll call you bigoted. And, I don't think I'm any of those things. I'm really just trying to help prevent these children from making potentially a very bad decision that they're going to regret. And especially now, we're seeing in the UK that this is happening where more detransitioners are saying, this was something I regret, this was a mistake, why did the adults not challenge me? I really think, so right now we're in August 2020, I think within the next 5 years or maybe a little bit longer, we're going to be seeing an explosion of children coming out and saying, I did not want to transition, this was a mistake, and it's really going to be awful.
Well, we're already seeing that. There's a lawsuit that was very prominent in the UK recently about a young girl who transitioned to be. Do you know the lawsuit I'm talking about?
I do, yeah. Kira Bell.
Yeah. I mean, it's heartbreaking because she's essentially ruined her body to the point where she's not going to be able to have children. In many cases, a lot of these girls can't have orgasms ever again.
No. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think in North America, we are still very much in denial about this. Whenever I'm on a show, if I'm on TV and I talk about this, the backlash after is just crazy. And I'm thinking, people need to wake up. I'm trying to stop this from happening, right? The whole point of writing this book and saying these things is trying to prevent what's about to happen.
Yeah, the backlash it's very strange because a lot of the backlash is from trans folks. And it seems that they equate any criticism or any examination of even children, even small children transitioning to transphobia. You must hate. And I get there has to be some trans people that as children knew that they were women or they were the opposite sex, that they were in the wrong body. There has to be. The question is,
I don't disagree with that.
I think we both don't. The question is how many. And how do they make that decision? And how many are actually being influenced by other factors, external? Children are very malleable. And that's part of the problem with making lifelong decisions as a 6-year-old. If you're a 6-year-old male and you decide that you're a female and you go through the transition and then you realize you're a gay man later in life, there's no recourse. There's nothing you can do to rectify that. That's what's terrifying about this, and that you're not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to say that even.
Right. And when I do point that out, people say that I'm using the gay community to try and as a shield or something like that. But medical professionals need to be the ones to do their job because it is their job. They should be doing proper assessments with these children and adults too to determine, what is the best way forward for you. And that's the only way they can really determine on a case-by-case basis whether transitioning is going to help somebody. But they can't do their jobs right now. Everyone I know that is ethical in the field has left or they stopped working with these patients because they don't feel they can do their job properly. So what you have instead is the people who are currently operating are activists, and they will really facilitate whatever a patient wants them to do, whether or not that may or may not be the right thing for them.
Yeah, how did we get to this point? Now, how did we get to this point, first of all, in academia? You come from academia. How did we get to this point where some subjects cannot be discussed, where, like, you were talking to that other professor and they were saying, even if you get tenure, this is not going to protect you.
In my forthcoming book, I have a section where I talk about professors who got into trouble. I mean, we've all heard about the comedians getting into trouble for violating some politically correct dictum. But professors, in many cases, very, very high-profile professors getting in trouble for incredibly innocuous jokes. And actually, I brought a list of names because I thought I might not remember them. Can I mention a few?
Sure.
A few of the cases? So Lazar Greenfield, who was the president-elect of the American College of Surgeons and the editor-in-chief of a journal called Surgery News, had written an editorial a few years ago where he was talking about the antidepressant benefits of coming in contact with sperm. In other words, and this was based on a peer-reviewed scientific paper. Actually, two of the authors of that paper are folks that I know quite well, friends of mine. And they had demonstrated that women who have protected sex versus unprotected sex end up scoring differently on these depressive measures. In other words, there was some sort of protective element to actually being exposed to sperm. And so in his editorial, he made a joke. It was during Valentine's. He said, so now there is a gift that a man can give a woman that's beyond flowers or chocolates or something to that effect. He had to step down from being president of the American College of Surgeons. He had to step down from being editor-in-chief because a whole bunch of women were very offended by that sperm joke. Now, the authors of the paper in question wrote a brilliant response where they said, how could he be treated in this way when all he was doing is actually literally reporting the data, the findings from our peer-reviewed study. So that's one example. Another example is Sir Tim, I think it's Sir Tim Hunt, who was a Nobel Prize winner in 2001.
I remember this one, yeah.
Right. Who he was speaking, I think, in Korea at a women in science conference, where he very, in a jocular way, said, it's a real problem when you have women in your lab. They fall in love with you, you fall in love with them, and so it's better to have segregated labs. His wife, by the way, is a staunch feminist who's a very prominent scientist, and she confirmed that he's hardly, a rabid sexist. He went through all sorts of hell.
Yeah, I remember that. And he was joking.
And he was
clearly.
joking. And in the book, I discussed several other of these examples. So imagine, you would think that a unblemished, exemplary career as a scientist, up to getting a Nobel Prize, could potentially protect you. But one comment that someone decides can unleash the tsunami of outrage, and you're dead.
Well, it's fascinating to me that the geneticists would rely on the archaeologists, being that the geneticists have the actual DNA that they can examine, where the archaeologists are piecing things together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Little tiny bits of information over the entire landscape.
Yeah.
And then you consider how much information they don't have access to that's in the ground.
Exactly.
I mean, there's so much.
I strongly resist the idea that archaeology is a science. I don't think it should be described as a science.
What do you think it should be described as?
It's more like a kind of philosophy. It's an attempt to interpret the past based on rather flimsy and limited evidence. And what you find in that interpretation is that the preconceptions of the individuals involved are being imposed upon the evidence, which then turns out to support their preconceptions. And that's not a scientific way of doing things. A scientific way of doing things is testing hypotheses and seeking to falsify them and seeing if they work out.
So the problem is drawing these conclusions and then being too rigid with these conclusions upon the further evidence.
That's my view.
Yeah.
That archaeology has been much too rigid, and that there's a climate of fear in archaeology. I don't mean to pick particularly on archaeologists here. I think this is generally true across other disciplines as well. These days, academics are driven by the need to publish research papers. That's what they build their careers on. If they can get a paper on their bit of research published in Nature or the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, etc., that's good for their careers. But then you confront the gatekeepers in those publications who regard any archaeological idea that is not part of the mainstream accepted consensus with great suspicion and are most reluctant to publish that information.
Now, what is the mainstream when archaeologists talk about seafaring humans? What do they date that to?
Well, the
Polynesians, right?
the great seafaring adventure that is accepted by archaeology is called the Polynesian expansion, and it's a remarkable story, and that occurs roughly 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. And those Polynesians were amazing ocean navigators. They could cross distances of thousands of kilometers with pinpoint accuracy. I mean, it's not an accident that the Polynesians found Easter Island. Finding Easter Island is a really challenging project. Easter Island is 2,000 miles from the coast of South America. It's 2,000 miles from the nearest other island, which is Tahiti. It's just a little speck in the middle of the ocean, but the Polynesians found it and settled there and appear to have brought a reproductively viable population there and appear to have made voyages back and forth. But that was 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. That was not 12,800 years ago. And this is where archaeology's adamant position that ocean voyaging was begun by the Polynesians and that there was no major ocean voyages before that, I think needs to be strongly questioned, and it needs to be strongly questioned in the light of this DNA evidence from the Amazon rather than rejecting the evidence. An attempt should be made to consider what that might mean.
Well, it's interesting because we know that the Egyptians had boats.
Yeah.
And so, if there were boats 4,500 years ago, why do we think that they didn't try them out in the ocean? That doesn't make any sense, especially if they existed 1,000 years prior, which is also possible.
Archaeologists wouldn't argue that the Egyptians had boats, but that is still within the framework of accepted history. It's the notion of a global navigating culture in the Ice Age that archaeologists can't swallow. It's a subject that I've kept on coming up against over a number of years. I think the best evidence for it is ancient maps, which show the world as it looked during the last ice age. I first explored this in Fingerprints of the Gods, and I've touched on the mystery again, and I have an appendix on the subject in this book, because I think these are very important. We're talking about maps that were drawn roughly between the 1300s and the 1700s. In other words, in relatively recent history. However, these maps were largely based on much older source maps, which they copied. And we can say that for sure, because one of the famous maps is the Piri Reis map, which was created by a Turkish admiral called Piri Reis in the year 1513. Actually, only a corner of his map has survived. It was originally a world map. We now just have a bit that shows the east coast of South America and North America and the west coast of Africa. Piri Reis writes in that map that it is in his own handwriting that he based it on more than 100 older source maps, some of which had come from the Library of Alexandria. In other words, that maps had been, when the Library of Alexandria had been destroyed in the 4th century AD or whenever it was, some of its contents had been rescued and brought to Constantinople, which became the Turkish capital. And Piri Reis had access to those maps, and he incorporated information from those maps on his maps, as well as incorporating more recent navigational information. And this is one of a whole category of maps which are extremely hard to explain. All of them based on older source maps, now lost, all of them incorporating extremely precise relative longitudes and latitudes. Latitude is not that difficult a technological feat, but longitude is a difficult technological feat. Longitude involves a chronometer. It involves knowing the time at the place you began your voyage and the local noon as well, and calculating the difference between them. You need a chronometer that will keep accurate time at sea with the motions of a ship. And it's just a plain fact that our civilization did not invent such a chronometer until the late 18th century. Before that, we didn't know what longitude we were at, and ships were constantly sailing unexpectedly into coastlines that they thought were hundreds of miles further away. So the discovery of the technique to do longitude was a major civilizational advance. Its presence in maps based on much older source maps that actually show the world as it looks during the last ice age suggests that somebody during the last ice age was mapping the world and had mastered the technique of calculating longitude. Classic example of these maps, and I make a point of this, is what's called the Pinkerton World Map, which was drawn in the year 1818, and it was based on the latest navigational information at that time. I reproduced that map in the book. What's missing from the map, entirely missing, is Antarctica. There's just a hole at the bottom of the world. There's nothing there, and the reason there's nothing there. There's another Pinkerton map that shows that. The reason that you'll need to find one that's centered on Antarctica. The reason that Antarctica is not there is that our civilization hadn't discovered Antarctica in 1818. Oh. So they couldn't authentically put it on a map in 1818. Actually, we discovered it in 1819, and that's when it starts appearing on modern maps. The problem is that Antarctica appears repeatedly on these much older maps, and it appears in the right place and a bit bigger than it is today, but very much as it looked during the last ice age. So what all of this suggests to me is that the world was mapped and explored by a global seafaring culture with a level of technology that was at least equivalent to ours at the end of the 18th century during the ice age.
Wasn't there also a map of Greenland that showed it underneath the ice?
Yes, there are. And another intriguing thing, I mentioned the Piri Reis map just now. Shown on the Piri Reis map, lying off the east coast of North America, is a large island with a row of megaliths, like a road of megaliths, running up the middle of it. That island is in the exact place of the Grand Bahama Banks.
Is it on? Is it on this one?
Yeah, it is. But can I point it out to you because the map's rotated? It's there.
That's right there. Okay, this thing.
That one.
Okay.
Right here.
That's great that you can bring this up, Jamie. That's really
amazing.
Good. So this island is sitting there off the southeast coast of North America.
Look at the way they used to draw things back then, too.
And what you see running down the middle of it is this road-like feature of megaliths. I'll point them out again.
I see, right there, yeah.
These here. These here. Now, the thing is, there was a long period of my life when I did a lot of scuba diving, and I was looking at underwater structures. And one of the sites I dived on was the Bimini Road, which is in the Grand Bahama Banks. And the Bimini Road is exactly where that island is. And here's the issue. I don't care whether the Bimini Road is natural or man-made. For me, the mystery is that it is shown above water on that map. And the last time it was above water was thousands and thousands of years ago. So for me, this is all evidence that we shouldn't dismiss the possibility that our ancestors had achieved a level of technology where they could explore and map the world's oceans. We shouldn't dismiss that.
There it is right there. So we don't know what those stones are or how they were created, but boy, do they look artificial.
That's Yonaguni in Japan we're looking at now. But
Go back to that image, Jimmy, the last image that we were just looking at. Look at that. I mean, that looks so man-made.
And you can see that it's rather like the pattern that's shown on the island in the map.
How deep is that today?
Oh, it's not very deep. It's about 20 feet.
But we think that was above water at some point.
It was definitely above water during the last ice age. When it finally went underwater, may have been as late as 8,000 or 9,000 years ago.
Is there anything else compelling that's in the immediate area that seems to indicate that there was some sort of a man-made structure?
Well, nobody's looked for it, and the whole effort of archaeology has been to dismiss the significance of the Bimini Road.
Why would they dismiss that?
Well, they say
they
say it's totally natural.
Come on, is it? Go back to that image again.
Looking at some other ones.
Listen,
This is the argument.
Go back to that image that we just saw.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
are you sure?
As somebody who spent a lot of time diving on the Bimini Road, I can tell you I absolutely do not think it's natural. I think it's a man-made structure. But the argument is that it's a kind of beach rock that forms in these blocky formations.
Does it? Is that
yes, beach rock does form in blocky formations. But here I believe that the beach rock has been used as a construction material. But I repeat, the key issue is not whether the Bimini Road is man-made or not. The key issue is that it features on a map above water. And that is a dating project. That tells us that somebody was mapping that bit of the world when it was above water. And
Jamie,
that
go back to that
takes us back a long way into the past.
The one that you just pulled up. Yeah, look at that one.
That's a stunning place. It's it's an amazing sight.
It's just like the odds of that being in that order with those uniformly sized rocks for how long is that?
Oh, hundreds of feet. It's a huge. It's actually shaped like the letter J. It's a giant underwater structure. It's really an enormous thing and very beautiful to dive on. And there's lots of very gentle, sweet nurse sharks down there that you can play with.
So that looks much more like random.
That's more random, and bits of it do look more random, and bits of it look highly constructed. I would not seek to claim that the Bimini Road is absolutely man-made. My claim about the Bimini Road is it's really fucking weird that it appears on a map above water, a map that was drawn in 1513 based on older source. And I go into the issue of ayahuasca in this book because, first of all, ayahuasca is itself another example of Amazonian science. As you and I and many of the listeners and viewers know, the active ingredient of ayahuasca is DMT. Dimethyltryptamine. But dimethyltryptamine is not normally accessible through the gut. We have to smoke it or vape it to get that rocket ship to the other side of reality. And the journey lasts, 10, 12 minutes, not much more than that, and sometimes quite a lot less. What ayahuasca does is it makes DMT available through the gut. The reason it's not available through the gut is because of an enzyme in the gut called monoamine oxidase. And that switches off DMT on contact. The ayahuasca vine, which is one of the two ingredients of the ayahuasca brew, the other ingredient is leaves that contain DMT. The ayahuasca vine contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which switches off the enzyme in the gut and allows the DMT to be accessed orally, which produces a rather different journey from the smoked or vaped DMT trip. It's a much longer journey. It's 4 or 5 hours. It allows you to integrate and to interrelate with the strange landscapes in which you find yourself amongst. And the entities that you encounter, I'm not making any claims about the reality status of those entities, but what I am saying, and it's a fact, is that people who work with DMT and ayahuasca do encounter what they construe to be entities who communicate with them intelligently. So somebody in the Amazon, out of 150,000 different species of plants and trees, selected 2 that are not psychoactive on their own, but when put together, create an extraordinary visionary brew. And ayahuasca means the vine of the dead. And what it's connected to in South American religious and spiritual thinking is what happens to us when we die. And the Tucano, who are an Amazonian people who work regularly with ayahuasca, I mean, the Tucano actually will give a teaspoonful of ayahuasca to a newborn infant. They feel ayahuasca is so important that there is a hidden realm around us which we are not normally aware of, and we need to be aware of it. And ayahuasca is an important part of that. In their ayahuasca journeys, the Tucano shamans experience visions, and they will then come back to an alert normal problem-solving state of consciousness, and they will paint and depict their visions. And what's intriguing, and I go into it in the book, is that quite a number of the Tucano paintings of the other world, of the afterlife realm, of the entrance to the other world, are geometrical, and they look exactly like the geoglyphs. So I'm beginning to wonder whether these geoglyphs were part of a system of spiritual ideas concerning what happens to us after death and what we need to do in this life to ensure a beneficial outcome. And oddly enough, that same system of ideas is found in the Mississippi Valley. In the Amazon, it involves particularly ayahuasca and the belief that the ayahuasca journey takes you to the afterlife realm and a journey along the Milky Way. In the Mississippi Valley, the mound builder sites up and down the Mississippi Valley, particularly Moundville in Alabama, exactly the same system of religious ideas associated with geometrical constructions. That on death, the soul, they're very specific, ascends to the constellation of Orion, transits from the constellation of Orion to the Milky Way, makes a journey along the Milky Way, which they call the path of souls, and encounters challenges and ordeals where the soul must account for the life that it has lived. Then we go to Egypt, and what do we find? The same system of ideas. The soul must rise up to the constellation of Orion. There's a narrow shaft cut through the southern side of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which targets directly the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt. Widely accepted as a star shaft or a soul shaft. The soul would rise up through that shaft, get to the constellation of Orion, which stands by the banks of the Milky Way. It would then transit to the Milky Way, which the ancient Egyptians called the winding waterway. And it would make a journey along the Milky Way where it would be confronted by challenges and ordeals. Very similar idea to the Tucano, very similar idea to the Mississippi Valley. As far as we know, none of these cultures were in contact with one another. Either we're dealing with a huge, unbelievable, extraordinarily detailed coincidence involving architecture and ideas, or we're looking at a legacy that was inherited in all of these different places from a remote common ancestor. And I believe that that's what we're looking at.
What do we think the people from the ancient Mississippi Valley, that culture, what do we think they were using if they weren't using ayahuasca, or do we think that's what they were using?
Well, that's an interesting question, whether visionary substances are the only way to get into altered states of consciousness. And I would say they are definitely not. Of course, there are visionary substances which are used in Native American vision quests. I've had the privilege of peyote ceremony with the Native American church.
I've never done that. What is that like?
I loved it, actually. I thought it was amazing. It doesn't overpower you in the way that DMT or ayahuasca does. It's much gentler. It's much more. You feel much more integrated and connected with nature. Your thought processes are quite clear. It felt just like a very beautiful and healing experience. And I loved the ceremony that I'm inside a teepee with 30 or 40 other people, and that there are specific roles that are assigned to those different individuals. One will keep the door, another will be responsible for the fire, which is a work of art in itself. Just gazing into that fire and the glowing embers is enough to induce an altered state of consciousness on its own. Incredible drumming, which drives your state of consciousness into a kind of peak experience. This is a technology for accessing other levels of experience and other levels of reality. And it's clear that the Native Americans had a number of advanced technologies in this area. The sun dance doesn't use a substance, but it uses austerity, it uses pain to drive an altered state of consciousness. The objective in every case seems to be, let's just for a while get ourselves out of the narrow, rigid frame of the alert problem-solving state of consciousness. We all need that. It's incredibly useful. Hunter-gatherers need it just as much as people in cities need it. But it's not the only state of consciousness available to human beings. And maybe that's one of the big mistakes that we're making in our culture, and was not made in shamanistic societies.